is broken, so soft his soul, he's got folges.
Do you write most of the songs for the band, or is that more of a collaborative process?
It is collaborative, but I definitely do the bulk of the songwriting in terms of I do all of the lyrics, and I create it like the bones of a song with acoustic guitar or something of the sort, and create like a melody from that a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely do probably the bulk of the songwriting, but we all kind of work out collaboratively. We work out where the structures are how the structure's gonna work, and you know where the choruses will go, and like how long they go for, and as well as like adding other sections to the song as well.
Yeah. Cool. Do you spend a lot of time on the lyrics of the album? I noticed in the first song, Showman, the lyrics "squeezing out my gut like frozen toothpaste," that kind of stood out to me, and I just had a little giggle, and I just thought, like, do those kind of things come naturally to you, or is that something you spend time focusing on, like creating a certain story or sort of imagery?
I definitely, yeah, I spend a lot more time with this project than I have in the past, writing lyrics at night and writing songs, and kind of working with a demo that wasn't particularly detailed lyrically and was more just based around melody, and then kind of later finding the right words or trying to tell the right story through the song. Yeah, it was a big focus for me, and kind of like wanting to be taken a bit more seriously as a band, and realizing that I had to step up and, you know, put a lot of work into the lyrical side as well, because it's, you know, the biggest part really.
Yeah, a lot of people just definitely focus on that.
Yeah.
Do you feel like this, I read in your little EPK that you guys feel this album is quite different from your previous releases because of, you know, COVID and the way that it was kind of like the creative process. How do you think that, like, what was the biggest part of that was different for you guys?
Well, we've got a new guitarist, D.
Cool.
Who came into the band just was around the time that we released Quotidian, our last record. Just kind of after that release, he joined the band, and we had Leith, who we recorded our last record with. He's living in Auckland, and he left, and he just kind of couldn't really fit it in because he was really busy with the university and stuff. So I think that was a big player in the sound changing quite a lot. Yeah. He had a lot of kind of he's quite musically he's really like kind of, I wouldn't say classically trained, but he like knows what all the chords are called, and like where all the scales are. And he's done a lot of, he's an engineer as well, and he produces on stuff for people as well. So he really brought like a different element.
Does he study
to it? And
at uni?
He did engineering. He went to engineering school in Auckland, something like that. But yeah, he definitely took on a bigger role as producing, along with Hamish and Oscar. Hamish plays the drums and Oscar's on the bass. They definitely had a bit more to say, like, than it has been in the past. It was more of a collaborative thing, and so I think for that reason the album came out quite differently. And I think, me personally, my music taste just changes so rapidly that it's quite obvious with the releases from this band, Marlin's Dreaming, that all of the releases have been so different. And like, whereas a lot of bands I really love quite often will release, you know, like 3 albums, and you can really tell that it's, you know, that it's the same band making these albums. But with us, I feel like sometimes I run into the problems of listening back and being like, wow, this is just so different from the last piece, and this is so different from the piece before that. But I think maybe this record we're trying to like be more confident about a sound that's kind of where we started, but also kind of wanting to progress as well. So it kind of like sits in between, kind of middle ground between like the post-rock kind of punk inspired elements of Marlin Streaming that weren't really present in our first release, but then also balancing that with kind of a lot of really melodic and almost folky elements that that'd be quite cool to move into.
Yeah, and I think that progressing through different releases can be really interesting, and I think that can, in a way, I guess you can expand that audience because you have people that like all the different stuff that you do. And I think that the growth, like musicians that have been making music for a really, really long time, say like 20 years or something, it's really cool to see the music that they're making now and the music that they made when they started. And sometimes that can like happen for the worse or for the better. I mean, like personally, I used to be a massive fan of Ed Sheeran, and then not as much now as I was.
Yeah,
but, like,
right.
It can also happen in like such a cool way, and then trying out new styles. And I think that your guys' sound is still very Marlin's Dreaming. Like you can still, I think, more of like elements of the production and the way that it's arranged hold that kind of like sound that's really it's really you guys. Yeah. Well,
I mean, the band hasn't really changed. It's been the same lineup pretty much for the most part. So yeah, we definitely have our tendencies to do certain have our habits in terms of songwriting and playing and the way that we structure a song. Yeah, definitely.
It must be nice working with the same people over the period of time. Like, were you guys friends before you started the band, or you kind of developed?
Yeah, we're all pretty close. All pretty close friends from even like way back at childhood.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. So yeah, it is pretty awesome. It's good just to be friends with your bandmates. I reckon. Like, I mean, I can understand how it can work if you're not great friends with your fellow collaborators as well, because it takes out a lot of the stuff, like when you have to have a hard conversation about if something isn't working. But it becomes a little bit more complicated when you're so close with that person, and you don't want it to come to a confrontation. Whereas bands that aren't as close but just treat it more professionally, I feel like they must find it a lot easier to deal with certain issues because they're not so like feelings based, or it's not so like
I think that's probably one of the hardest things that all bands have to face, is like trying to find the balance between friendship and having a relationship with your band members and that professional aspect, because it's so important to be able to have those conversations with the people you're working with, but also without any of that friendship, but it's not as fun. And that's kind of like why we all do it. It's just to hang out with mates and make music and share that kind of thing.
Yeah, big time.
You said this album is about your hometown and like the people in it. Are there any songs that you wrote about specific people, even if it's just like a shop owner, and do you think they know, like, do you think they listen to it and know it's about them?
I often write about just people that I've run into that day, and it's never specific. I mean, there'll be specific parts that allude to their appearance, or maybe what I think that they're thinking and they're going through, but it's never like I'm never wanting to like tell that person's story. It's always my story and like my reaction to kind of how I perceive that person, and kind of like it's almost like it's quite judgmental, to be honest, but it's kind of like a lot of the time it's where I draw inspiration, for because you're often like have an encounter with someone, and you see them walking, it might be someone working at the checkout at the supermarket, or someone taking their kids to school. I don't even know. It's just completely random. You kind of observe them from a distance, and you kind of wonder what's going on in their life, because you can only see it from your eyes, and it's quite interesting to try and put yourself in other people's shoes sometimes and think from like a completely different perspective. And it's never going to be correct or what they're actually thinking or what they're going through. But I find it interesting to I like reading a lot of fiction, and people. Wait, fiction's the not true one, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Fiction, a lot of fiction. Where,
about that.
yeah, I do. I was about to say non-fiction. No, I like reading a lot of fiction, and I like how authors can really like throw you deep into someone else's story, and it's not even the author's story either. It's something they've made up, and I really enjoy that. So when it comes to songwriting and writing lyrics, I definitely draw from a lot of people that I run into that day or things that have happened.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting way to songwrite, I think, because I think a lot of artists write a lot about themselves, which isn't a bad thing, but to be able to write about it's more like creative writing, like writing.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah,
somebody else is really interesting, and I think especially in this time, like from a lot of artists, I've heard that their recent albums have been like their most introspective work because everyone's kind of been stuck with themselves and writing a lot about what they're going through. And I was going to ask if you felt like this was your like part of your guys' most introspective work, but writing about other people kind of is almost the opposite, which is really interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly intertwined with a lot of personal stuff as well. But yeah, there's just certain parts where, or certain songs where I'm not actually writing about myself, but it sounds like it's in first person, which can be, I guess, a bit confusing when there's some of them not written about me, then some of them written about my personal experience, going through something. So yeah, it would be nice to really like hone in on an album and make the lyrics and the songwriting all like one big piece of like, this is what's going on, and there's no, it's really easy to pinpoint, the story that's being told across the whole album, like a really conceptual album. But this one definitely wasn't in that way. Although, we're kind of in two minds about, making a conceptual album where you can really easily explain, like, or you can easily listen and hear, like, this is what they're talking about the whole time. Like a heartbreak album or whatever. But yeah.
Do you feel like most of your previous work has that been something? Have you set out with an idea, or have you just kind of written songs as they come to you and then pieced them together to be a larger body of work?
Yeah, I've always just written songs and pieced them together. Yeah, which is kind of brings me back to the whole. It would be cool to do a conceptual album, and it's definitely an interest of mine, but it's just nothing that's happened yet. All of the albums previously and now that's just been released is kind of a hand-picked selection, of demos, because I'm just always writing demos in my room. And I'll often pick out a few, and then we'll jam them with the band, and I'll show the band, and then or Hamish or Oscar or D might have an idea for something, and then we'll just kind of jam that out and figure it out together. And it is due to that process, I think, that makes it not as cohesive in terms of like a solid concept. But I think there's definitely merit in having an album where you're just constantly writing, and then you're picking the stuff that you think is strongest, because I guess you get your reps up.
Yeah, I think especially when you're first starting to, I mean, you guys have definitely got some stuff out by now, but it's still kind of at that stage of like, I mean,
still
fresh,
relatively fresh,
when that stops, like when you get to be like Elton John's age, you're like, fuck it, I'm just gonna make whatever I want. There's not so much of a like thought of picking your, the best of the bunch. Yeah.
I find it so hard to stick to a certain mood and genre, especially even over the course of one album. I find it so hard to just stick to the same kind of genre of music. which a lot of bands are really good at, and it becomes really, nice to listen to because you've got a common strain the whole way through. And although this album definitely does, I think at the same time there's certain outlier songs that it's just like I didn't want to leave off the album because it's just I listen to so much different music. It's too hard to focus on a single genre.
Do you have a favorite artist or particular inspiration that you feel like you draw from, whether consciously or not, when you write?
I mean, I'd say it's just a bit of a mix, I think like Yola Tengo and Sun Kill Moon and Wilco and Calexico and Alex G and those are all kind of artists that I'll often hear a song and be like, oh, I'd like to write something like that. Yeah. So in that way, there'll definitely be something I'll hear a song from Wilco, or even like who else? Something that's more easy that people will know. I don't know. Yeah, Wilco probably. Wilco or Alex G.
Yeah.
Or someone like that. I'll often listen to a song and be like, oh, those chords sound like some chords I've been using lately, and and you can kind of see which route they've taken those chords, and it can be quite inspiring to be like, well, I'd even like someone like King Krul or something. Less so probably now than I used to be influenced by King Krul, but definitely like the way that he structures his songs. And yeah, he's definitely an influence as well.
It's a good way to diverge from maybe like a creative process that you are stuck in, is like almost not copying in a bad way, but using other people's music as an influence to get started, and then you kind of riding on a different trajectory than you might have to do. Yeah, well,
it's always copying. I mean, I'm always copying other people's music, we all are.
I mean, it's totally not a bad thing, and I think that so many people like think that copying people is like a crime, as long as you're not actually plagiarizing someone else's work, it's just fine.
Well, I mean, whether people can admit it or not, it's always being copied, consciously or subconsciously. There's only so many notes and so many chords and so many different ways of arranging it. I mean, there's so many overlapping chords and even like certain choruses, that you could apply to so many different songs. They're in the same keys, and it's just the way that the band plays it differently, or the way that your melody differs, or that your cadence, or that really like makes those big differences in actually how a song sounds. So I think I'm always copying someone's sort of section of a song, or someone's chord choice that they wanted to use, or someone's melody, or the way that they structured their melody, whether it goes up first and comes back down, or So
yeah, absolutely. Do you have any gigs planned for this album?
We're waiting for an announcement tomorrow, and if it's positive in the South Island, then we'll be able to go and play some shows that weekend, actually.
Cool.
In Dunedin and Christchurch.
Yeah. Exciting.
And then late November, we've got some shows planned for Auckland and Wellington. Yeah.
Cool. Oh, well, hopefully we'll be back to normal and we'll see you guys up here around that time.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
Fingers crossed. Toes crossed.
Yeah.
Oh, well, so nice to talk to you.
Yeah, nice to talk to you too. Thanks for the interview.